All right, I'm briefly going to start you out with maybe a reference to what I call Jesus Encounters 201. And that's in some regard when Ellen and I aren't experiencing Jesus Encounters 101, which is kind of what we talked about today. We're experiencing right now Jesus Encounters 201. And Jesus Encounters 201 is where you are in the company of folks who are professed believers, and now you're challenging those folks to do all that Jesus commanded and directed us to do. That's step two. Because if we're part of the Great Commission, it's got kind of three components, right? As you go tell. If the telling is successful, baptize. And then following the baptism, which is coming out of the closet, then teach those folks to do all that Jesus commanded. Make sense? That's the flow? All right. So we're meeting with Jesus believers who are apprehensive, perhaps afraid, anxious, unknowing, and they don't feel free to be able to ask desperate people in their life if they follow Jesus the way that Steve says, if they're a Jesus believer even. And so in exchanges that we're having with folks, we're discovering that folks are doing kind of what we talked about perhaps about 3 years ago, is there's people in their lives, and at one point in time, they talked about church or they kind of talked about Jesus. And so folks have assumed, because at one point, 18, 20 years ago, they mentioned Jesus or they talked about church, that they're believers, but they've never confirmed it for themselves. And so Ellen and I have been in situations where we're trying to help folks recognize that perhaps all you can do with these folks is introduce them to Jesus, because some of the dire aspects of their lives suggest, in one case, that a parent is going to be dead soon. That parents who they're uncomfortable spending time with because it feels like a false sense of Christianity or cultural Christianity, they're afraid to ask their parents, not only are you true Jesus believers, but to explain the difference in cultural Christianity versus a relationship with the Lord Jesus. And so they're engaged in behavior that's quite counterproductive to the Great Commission, which is they're practicing being nice people. And I would challenge folks that church people, for the most part, are nice people. But sometimes we're nice people without direction. We're nice people without a rudder. We're nice people without a conviction. And we're also guilty of being silent witnesses. And so, for instance, I'll just give you a little bit more. In the situation where an acquaintance who may be becoming a friend, but certainly as a brother in the Lord Jesus through his shed blood, he's tried to satisfy some of the difficulty watching his dad experience deteriorating health by bringing him food. Food that's actually exacerbating his dad's condition. And so Ellen was able to kind of speak across and use her experience with dying relatives to be able to say, the only and the best thing you can do is introduce them to who you know, and that's the Lord Jesus. Is that a difficult situation? Yes. Does it feel uncomfortable? Perhaps. Does it feel embarrassing? It might. Is it a reality if indeed you possess what you profess? Absolutely. Because if eternity is real for you and there's nothing more that you can really do in this life to help folks have a quality of effective life, then you need to introduce them to what comes next, which is longer, which is a very high quality of life. And if the wrong decision is, if Jesus is denied in this lifetime, they don't have a second opportunity to do over. So let me pause there for a second. Any thoughts or comments or questions even?
It is a difficult situation for a child to have to feel like they need to talk to their parent about that. Even though my mom and dad, we were always at the church. My dad was, different. He opened the church, he closed the church. But he was never one at home that we saw to like read his Bible, study his Bible, where we saw mom doing that kind of stuff all the time. And it actually did come down when he was in the hospital. It was before, I think it was before he went into the nursing home, that we had to stay with him because he didn't handle pain medications well, and he would get really delirious, and someone kind of had to be with him. So I, being the youngest, got to spend the night there with him. But there came a point where he was just crying and just beside himself, and I just had to kind of have to sit with him and talk with him about it. And I really had to ask him about his faith in Jesus, and had he really been there? And yes, I know he was under drugs for pain and stuff like that, but I truly believe that when he said yes, that he knew what we were talking about, and he had. So it was something that I did have to broach, and I think, just because we had never really seen that side of him being active at home, we always saw it at church. We all just kind of wanted to know for sure. And so I went there, and I think it meant a lot too, and I could relay that back to my siblings and my mom, even, that that gave us a lot of peace about his future, which he still was around a few more years after that. But it's not a comfortable thing. But at the time, what he was going through right there, that's all I had to offer him was Jesus, and I needed to know that he had accepted him and that he was relying on him also.
So Sherry, is the thing that Steve mentioned earlier. That knowledge and that relationships, that's the pearl of great price. And that's what you have because of the Great Commission. That's what you have to offer the world at large. That's what Jesus was talking about when he said, you're going to do much more and many greater things than I've been able to do. That's what we have. And in the interaction, perhaps I've shared with you, it seems I mentioned parents, but it's not limited to just parents, folks. It's limited to, it's not limited. It's unlimited. It includes your brothers and sisters. It includes your friends. So one of the folks we worship with regularly is an individual who struggles with a very debilitating chronic illness, and regularly the key is to remind him that this life may not be as luxurious as in some ways we think it's supposed to be. And in the throes of the pain and the weakness and all of those things, because we can't offer him a cure. We can't offer him remedy, but we can offer him recognizing, leaning on the everlasting arm. And that's in and amongst people who profess a belief in the Lord Jesus. And so I say that, folks, because one of the things we're discovering again, especially by ardently looking for a place to, or places to, when we're in those areas to worship and serve, is we're learning that churches do not give people, number one, permission and freedom and comfort to be in the business of the Great Commission. And I want to make a brief reference before I tell you the topic today, and then I'll pose to you the questions that I'd like you to be able to answer when we finish this today. That Ed Hoagland, again, made me mad. And you guys know every time I read anything from Ed Hoagland, I personally want to take a shovel and maybe hit him several times. But doing that would, again, work for me the way that Steve described. It would make me glad, but it would also do a grand disservice to the kingdom business that guy is about almost every day. When you read a report from a guy who's on an airplane and he's writing ministry notes and he's allowing people to intrude in his space, read the ministry notes, and then he takes the time on an airplane to discuss with them what he's written to the point where they take it seriously and they pray with him to be able to demonstrate an established relationship opened by the Holy Spirit. That's crazy talk. That does not happen in modern times. We've all got our earbuds or our AirPods in, and we do not mess with the person next to us in the seat, let alone the fact that the airplane noise is so disruptive. Why would I want somebody to be engaged in a discussion with me if they're not my significant other? And yet, Ed finds new ways to reveal that he's always intentionally on mission. I hate that guy. Where we're going today is this. How do church people know / acknowledge when they're ready for more? How do church people know / acknowledge when they're ready for more? So let me pause there. Questions? Comments? What are you talking about?
Okay, I'll dive in. More what?
Right.
That's
good. Right.
More people, 301 level, doctrine, teaching. I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Great.
So I'm just kind of thinking that you're wanting us to ask the question.
Yep. Good. So, Michaela, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
You are a martial arts student, correct?
Yes.
Are you any good?
Depends on who you ask.
Great. Okay. I appreciate your response there. So I'm going to ask you, are you any good? By your own perception.
I'm not where I would like to be, but I am decent at it.
So I'm decent at it, but I'm not where I'd like to be. Can you add a little color to that? What does that mean? What does decent mean?
Well, I've earned a brown belt, but sometimes I don't feel like I'm deserving of it.
So I'm sorry, you have a brown belt, but what was that last part? Sometimes you don't feel like
I'm deserving of it, like I earned it. I know I did, but sometimes I don't feel like it.
Why don't you feel like it?
Because I doubt myself and my abilities.
Okay. So at what point will you not doubt that you deserve the belt that you've earned and that you discontinue doubting your confidence? At what point does that occur for you?
I don't know that it will ever stop because it's human nature to doubt yourself, I feel like.
Okay, so Michaela has said it's in your nature to doubt yourself. What do you think about her statement?
Are you speaking to all of us now?
Speaking to all of you assembled.
I think that part of what she might be saying can be true, but is dependent upon the personality of the individual. There are some folks that are so confident that they're reckless. They're so type A alpha people that they can do anything. But I think that her groundedness is one that is something different from a lot of young people personally.
So what I'm asking about is, I understand that individuality, but I'm truly asking about when success and doubt disappear. Because at some point in time, if it is human nature to doubt, which is a very fair and fine statement, at what point does that get eliminated?
I'll wade in a little bit for Michaela's sake. I might be wrong, but you'll probably feel worthy of a brown belt once you get your black belt, right? That's kind of human nature. That once we're at the next level, we think we're supposed to be, okay, I've kind of got it down from a level before.
I think that's usually called the Peter principle. Everyone rises to the level of their own incompetence. Okay, that was a big pause.
Other thoughts about what you're hearing? Other thoughts? Yes.
I kind of like what Steve was saying, where you feel comfortable that you at least mastered something when you get to go to something different, right?
Yep.
You build on it. But then when that happens, you have a whole new level of doubt, because now you're at this new level. So I think it's kind of it's a morphing doubt, for lack of a better word, because I think it changes as you progress and you get further on. You're like, okay, now I got this, but now I'm here. And so now you start questioning yourself again until you figure that part out. And it just takes a while.
Okay. So let me ask a pointed question. And Michaela, thank you for your very candid and honest answers. What can eliminate or remove the doubt?
Feedback.
I would say that's part of it, but part of it's repetition and repetition building the confidence to where you get to the point where it's second nature to you. You no longer begin to doubt whether you're doing it right because you continue doing it.
Results.
Yes.
Confidence.
What's that, Jerry?
Confidence.
Yeah. Hey, listen, guys. I'll share something with you that I hope makes sense. Michaela's right on that there's a part of us that always doubts in some ways where we are. Here's the remedy for that. Owning the doubt.
You said owning the doubt.
Owning the doubt, yeah. Yeah, you made me think there's a difference between doubt that is paralyzing,
Yes.
that keeps you stuck,
Yes.
and then doubt that motivates you.
Yes. Steve Jenkins presents a lot of this through what he does, but we've known Steve for so long, we take it for granted. What that doubt in some ways does. When you are able to recognize the breadth of what you don't know, then you can admit that you don't know it, and that's where your next course of action is to acquire in some ways that which you didn't previously know. And then what happens is the doubt doesn't paralyze you or weaken you because you're already aware of what you don't know.
I heard this once a while ago. The dangerous part of this is when we're not aware, when we don't know what we don't know.
Correct. Correct. And Ella and I have learned a lot of lessons through our marriage, financially, business-wise. And one of the things that we regularly not only talk about it among ourselves, but even with other folks who in some ways come into our circle, we have these exchanges, is sometimes you don't know what you don't know that you don't know. And thus you don't even know to ask the question because you don't even recognize that there's something missing. And sometimes failure, because of attempting to do, is the best doubt reliever, because now you've learned and opened up a door that you previously were afraid or were shy to even venture into. And this week, Bruce and I were having a discussion about that relatively our families are those that charge into the unknown. We're very comfortable going into the unknown and unknown situations because of the learning impact that it has on us. Is being in uncomfortable and unknown situations with unseeable consequences for us is an adventure. And so we own the fact that there's a whole lot that we don't know, and we look forward to being able to expand our breadth of knowledge to recognize even more what we don't know. And so it's not a debilitating factor that we experience the doubt. It's actually a curiosity that creates a kind of fuel. And like Steve referenced before, and this really works, I believe, in Michaela's discipline. By the way, it's called a discipline of martial arts. The more you practice, the more muscle memory you develop. But if you only do your martial arts in a classroom, well then doggone it, absolutely you're going to have doubt. Because classroom karate or classroom martial arts is not the same as when somebody accosts you in a nightclub. It's not the same as when somebody accosts you on the street and they want to take your money. And you don't have somebody reminding you of the commands or what the position needs to be for you to take care of the situation or protecting yourself. That only comes from outside of the classroom and getting a chance to use it to the point where the basics happen without you needing to think about them. So let me pause there. Thoughts, responses, comments, disagreement.
I'm hesitant to weigh in, but I'm going to do it anyway. Number one, I think of the difference between a fellow who plays in a movie, I think it's called Lake Placid, where he gets ready to go and together, I've got a brown belt, and next thing you know, he's on the ground. And it's like, well, aren't you supposed to say go first? He has a competitive, kind of deal. He has only been doing it in the dojo. And then the other side of that is a scene from one of the Karate Kids where Mr. Miyagi has a dojo in his own Okinawa home. So that is indicative that he's not just having a class, he is doing things outside of the classroom. He actually goes in and practices all by himself. So I think there's a validity to what you're saying, but we need to get to the place where it is, and I thought about this earlier. I am so sometimes compartmentalizing things where it needs to be all together.
Hey, Gene, you're spot on. I think Sarah's popping in there if I missed that, but you're spot on, Gene. Is if you're only a Jesus believer on the days that are assigned for you to be a Jesus believer, then there's always going to be anxiety. There's always going to be some doubt. There's always going to be some difficulty attending to that which you should attend to, because you almost need an instructor or a coach telling you what you're supposed to do minute by minute.
Agreed.
Sarah, did I cut across you earlier?
No, sir, you did not.
Okay. So because of the depth of Michaela's answer, I want you to think about this, and let me give you a couple of similar scenarios. If you take dance lessons, and this is a real good one to throw out for you guys, because for the most part, you're not dancers. But if you were to take dance lessons, I want you to think about how awkward and uncomfortable you would feel, and that sense of doubt that Michaela talked about. And the way that that gets eliminated, you got to dance. You got to dance with a partner. You got to dance, and you got to practice all of the things on your own that you were taught in the class. Other than that, you're always going to, if you're not going to do that, you're going to do what the Bee Gees say. And that's going to be, you're going to, when the music starts, you're going to be standing on, what are you doing on your back? You're going to be standing against the wall watching other people dance. Until you get comfortable enough that I don't doubt that I can dance, I don't doubt that it's a good time, and I don't care who's watching. Playing a sport. There's a point where it's okay for you to go from drills and practice and practice team, and at some point in time, you want to start playing, if not junior varsity, you want to play varsity. Am I close there, Jerry?
That's it.
After a while, practice has to be not fun and not rewarding if you've done it diligently enough to the point where you can help other folks understand how to thump a ball back, or what the best position is to have your hands in when you're swinging the bat, or the rotation that needs to be on a basketball. After a while, you're not content to just be learning or be practicing. Here's a good one. I think maybe some of us might remember, or you've blocked it out of your mind. Driver's ed. I know when I started driving, and I told you guys the story countless times, I never thought I'd be able to keep the car between the lines because the lines were too close together. And the car seemed like it was the size of a small aircraft carrier. And actually, the very first time, because I had the stuff that Michaela's talking about, the doubt, and et cetera. But one time without my, because fortunately I was using my own car my parents had purchased for me, and I wasn't doing a lesson, so I took the car and I took it into the neighboring town about 5 miles away. And I parked it successfully with diagonal parking. But because I was so excited and actually so apprehensive a little bit, because I shouldn't have been driving my car because I didn't have my license, I actually hit a lady's light when I was moving the car after getting back into it. Now, here's the neat part. I only broke my car. So I had to get my car fixed, but because I was so afraid and doubtful about it, I didn't drive it as well as perhaps I would drive it later. And then I had to explain it to my parents because I thought I was going to be able to get away scot-free, and I didn't. Now, that kind of occurrence, lo these many years later, I can't imagine that happening again. That would never happen again until I get to the point where my mental ability is no longer equal to what I think it is, and then I shouldn't be driving. But that's the kind of thing that happens in the beginning during the learning process because I'm doubtful, because I'm afraid, because I think people are watching me and they may not be. So let me pause. Your thoughts on that?
Bear with us, Preston, we got warnings going on on everybody's phones right now.
We're under a tornado warning right now.
Yeah.
Oh,
They're
okay.
telling, they're telling, I'm trying to pull up the radar.
Radar looks bad.
Interesting.
All right, you to clear the locale.
I'm waiting to see what everybody says, but everybody's phones just went off, I had us on mute, so I was like, hold on, we're not ignoring you, we're trying to get our phones.
I actually had mine turned off.
Yeah, mine was turned off too.
Mine was too, but it still came through.
Yeah.
Tornado alert.
All right, so while you're all plugging into the impending weather, let me give you a thought to think about. And if you're comfortable overlooking the need to evacuate before you all wind up in Kansas because the house gets picked up and taken there, what do you think the purpose is for sermons? What's the purpose for small groups? What's the purpose of Sunday school? And what's the purpose of what we kind of do that we've called Bible 201, Bible 301?
Would you, purpose of sermons,
Purpose of everything.
purpose of Sunday school, purpose of small group, and purpose of what we do with the Bible 201, that's what you asked, right? Okay.
That's right.
Just making sure I heard that correctly. Thank
You heard
you.
it very well. Yep.
Can you repeat one more time, Sarah?
Yeah, so what is the purpose of sermons, basically sermon time, Sunday school time, small group time, and then what we call our Bible 201 time?
Right. And I will hint to you because you're all looking for your weather forecast. I'll tell you that there's one word that's the purpose of all of them, but then they each have specific purposes within the grand purpose.
I mean, the purpose of everything is to come to Jesus, right?
Again,
It's boring here. The purpose of Jesus is to put, the purpose of all this is to put to Jesus, is to show Jesus, to show him to others.
okay.
okay? And then it's almost like those, four, environments, for lack of a better word, they're kind of at different levels. Because I think some brought up last week that sometimes the discernment is kind of more broad, because you've got everybody there at different levels, right? You've got business who know nothing, where you've got people there that think they know everything, and people in between. So you've kind of got different levels there, so it's at a more, I don't want to say surface level, but it's not quite as deep as something like a small group. Because in a small group, that's the idea of a small group, you've got a small group of people that you can then dive deeper into things. And you can go, mile down as needed. Sunday school, again, is kind of broad, but a little bit deeper than a sermon, because again, you're gonna have 4 different levels. And then in the Bible 201, it's now saying how do you apply it.
Okay. Yeah, I like a lot about that answer. What do you guys think about what Sarah just said? By the way, I think it's raining. Is that what the torrential sound is?
Yeah, rain, torrential rain.
It's kind of going sideways, it's not dropping down.
Gotcha.
Wind is howling.
I have strong opinions, strong ones on all of this, and I won't get into all of it. But what I believe happens, what I see happening in the American church that has been exported around the world, is more of an education model versus a training and competence model, for lack of a better term. And so the purpose is fuzzy. People don't really know. And I could prove that by giving us each a piece of paper and asking us to list the purposes of it. And we'd all have different answers. But I think we can capture the purpose, and we probably agree if we said spiritual growth, but I don't think that's actually it. I think it's more theological growth or intellectual growth in spirituality. And so depending on the program, we will take our understanding deeper, but not necessarily our competence. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Steve, there's a wonderful brilliance to that. And because this is recorded, some of us can steal what you just said and pretend to own it, and that'll be plagiarism. But oh well, let the costs come where they may. Appreciate that greatly. The ideal of these 4 disciplines is that they're supposed to be discipleship opportunities. The ideal.
Yes.
And that's what Steve just said. What they really wind up being in our Western world is their educational introductions. And we can probably flavor that a little bit by saying educational and network or community organizations. Because there's a lot of education. That's why one of the things we hear church people say a lot is I go to church and we're fed. I'm fed very well at my church. Mm-hmm. That statement makes my head want to spin off my shoulder. But you've explained. We'll talk about that why perhaps later.
Means is we end up being educated beyond our level of obedience.
Oh yeah, very, very much. And sometimes we're introduced to concepts that feel so lofty and so beyond us that we just never can truly embrace the 2 concepts that you've heard us talk a lot about over the past several months, especially since Steve come on board, the how and the why. And so when I take a look at these 4 disciplines, and just like Sarah said, when you've got a sermon, you've got a variety of learners, of potential students. There are a lot of different levels. So you really have to sometimes introduce a concept. You're majoring a lot on the what. And you may get a little bit of other stuff there, but for the most part, you're teaching a concept. So there's a lot of what involved in the sermon. And you don't have a chance to disagree, push back, or answer or ask questions unless they're presented by the speaker in the traditional Western church model. By the way, that's not the way that rabbis or Jesus taught. That's not the way that Paul preached. That was not the environment, but that's what we've adopted. Now, I would probably, even though I asked this in this order, I asked you small groups next, Sunday school. Sunday school is now more of the what environment, but because there's more classification where people are closer in rank, either through age or through a position in life, you now get what in a smaller group. You have an opportunity to ask questions about, if you need to, even the what, and you might get a little bit, depending on the Sunday school curriculum, a little bit of the why. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I want to throw a little bit of a monkey wrench into this. Researching what Sunday school is all about, it was originally started by Robert Race, I think it was, in the UK, and the purpose was not spiritual growth, the purpose was not education, it was evangelism. It was an outreach opportunity to young people, and that was the purpose. And like most programs that are evangelistic, they kind of calcify and settle into, again, this education model because we don't know what to do with it.
Correct, Steve. And that's what we're talking about. We'll get to finishing this up next week when there's less of a tornado coming to you guys. We've got things that the start and at their pure idealism are great things, but we've turned them into calcified programs. And so Steve's right on, is that the idea was, especially for young people, to immerse them in a godly environment, a Jesus-oriented environment, and then say, go and tell. But as our culture has become more insulated and isolated, the going and telling is not something that's fair for you to ask me to do.
And learning is not so threatening, I would add.
Sure, because you just get to sit and you get to sit and soak.
Do anything with it.
Right.
Learning is not so threatening because we're not required to do anything with it.
Correct. And we talked about foreign language last week. That's what our foreign languages are in your high school curriculum, if not your college curriculum. You're not expected ever to do anything with it. You just have to learn it. Small groups. The Saddleback, Willow Creek kind of idea is at its core a wonderful, great thing. That's kind of reflective of the first century, where people go and they eat together. And they learn through eating together how perhaps to pray together, and then how to play together, and then how to learn enough about each other's lives where they can now be very open and have a dialogue and discussion with people that they don't feel it's as embarrassing as it would be in the big church environment or in the Sunday school environment. Because now they can find individuals, if not couples, and they can be as transparent as perhaps they can't be in those other environments. And in that environment, there's a lot of focus on certainly the what, but now in small groups, it's the how. And you get the how because people, if you build relationships, will tell you where they're struggling with these concepts that you've learned. And they'll tell you how either they're successful or how they're tanking it. Not so much the why, but how. And that's what when we talked to you earlier about meeting folks and having these Jesus Encounter 201s, that's what we're experiencing, a whole lot of hows in people's lives and recognizing how we're failing, how we're missing the mark because we understand certain concepts, but we don't know how to implement them. And then the Bible 201, the Bible 301, kind of considering what we call in corporate terms a university curriculum style. What we try to focus on is a lot less of the what, because we assume the people that are in the 201, 301, 401 levels are graduates of the what. They now need to focus on the how and the why. All four of those in their purest forms are discipleship mechanisms that, like Steve says, we've comfortably had them convert to educational models. So let me pause there because I'm gonna pause and we'll pick this up next week. But your thoughts and your responses.
So basically what I'm getting then is largely what you said earlier is what's missing really in most churches is the intentionality of it all. Because then what you end up with is a whole lot of what? And intellectual learning and discussion, but there's never any real opportunity to, same with Michaela's martial arts.
No application.
Where do you apply it? Where do you get learning through repetition of that service? So that's kind of what the missing part is, and why it's become kind of fuzzy for most people going to church today, is because they don't even really understand why they're there, what's the intention of it.
Yes, yes. And I know Jerry has said this before, and Steve, I'm going to bet you have said this before. Not Steve J, Steve K. You've gotten somebody fresh off their certification or their licensing, or somebody fresh out of seminary and they've done their missionary sub-program. And you have to take your arm and put it around the person and say, I know everything that you've learned in class, but the field is actually going to be quite different. When you get on the job, it's going to be quite different from all the stuff you learned in class. You're going to be able to use some of that, but what we do in the field is going to be very different. And so, guys, that's exactly a reflection of what Steve J just said, is that when we consider, and I'm going to end on this point, guys, when we consider, I've never really been discipled before. No one's ever really discipled me. Well, you have. You've been plenty discipled, especially if you've been church members for 10 years, if not 30, 40 years. It's just like Steve and Steve just said, there's no intentionality to it. And so all of the models you've been exposed to are about discipleship. No one's, though, they've not put an arm around you and they've said, I'd like to disciple you, right? Because that is what should happen if these 4 models are implemented correctly. Except there's no expectation other than absorbing information, sitting at the trough and feeding. And thus, this discipleship that we've been doing is not recognized as discipleship. And as we chart our course as IF, as Interlink Fellowship, this has got to be in the DNA of our intentionality. The Great Commission. And it's not just understanding what it is and where it is in the 4 Gospels and Acts. It's understanding what it is and how to do it. And then practicing it. And feeling, like Michaela said, that sometimes, and look, Steve had it today. I'm doubting myself. I should have done this differently, but I doubted myself. But here's the beauty. He recognized where he dropped the ball and he went, Lord, I operated like a white belt today. Can you help me operate with the brown belt? That's the one that I know that I own. Help me operate like a brown belt. And then help me through use of my brown belt to comfortably get to black belt. I'm going to dig in and I'm going to do what it takes to get to a black belt because I'm going to do more than do the classroom studies as a brown belt. And recognize all the areas of my deficit. Recognize my physical liabilities and limitations. Help me to be aware of those and shore those up so that by the time I arrive at a black belt, I know I've earned it and I'm confident enough in what I know and what I know that I don't know. Other than that, martial arts is just education. So your thoughts, your comments as we close this weekend. We'll try to finish this up next week. All right, no comments. So let me remind you of a question. I'll revisit something that Gene said so you'll understand the context in which this is placed. I appreciate that Gene says it's been a while since we've done Jesus encounters. But guys, if you're practicing your brown belts the way that Michaela mentioned, it doesn't matter that you've had a couple of weeks because you had last week. So your Jesus encounters should be in your rearview mirror. They should be yesterday or the day before that. And part of the way that that happens is an anju mechanism that she mentioned that I told you I'd represent. And here's that. If you frequent a place or if people know you regularly, they should know you're a Jesus believer. And potentially, that should either attract or repel folks, recognizing that if they get too close to you, you're going to start talking about Jesus. And for those folks who are struggling and want to know more, then you're the right magnet who's going to attract them. So your Jesus encounters shouldn't be 2 and 4 and 3 and 18 weeks ago. They should be the last week that was, with the sense of intentionality, because we're about the Great Commission, especially if there are places that we're going often enough, whether it's the teller or the server or the host or the gas station attendant. If they see you regularly, they should know you're a Jesus believer, and you should be scaring them or you should be attracting them. My comment or my question to you that I'm looking for an answer for you for next week is, what do you want to do for Jesus? And when will you be ready, or when will you know that you're ready? What do you want to do for Jesus? And when will you be ready, or when will you know that you're ready? That's the question I'm going to pose to each of you, except maybe for Steve and Garrison and Delaney. But if they've got answers, that'll work too. So I'm going to be looking to get those from you for next week. Thoughts, clarifications, etc. before we close?
I would just want to pull a little bit of the fear out of it. Theoretically, what would you do for Jesus if you knew you were going to succeed? You knew you wouldn't fail. Just to pull the obstacle out of that. So we can.
Sure.
Don't know if that helps, but I'm throwing it out there.
Appreciate that. I would tell you, I thought Steve and his Latter-day Saints encounter was a success, but a success with training wheels, in that he at least rode his bike to the event. Later, he had a process that at some point in time, I need to take the helping wheels off this and balance and do it the right way. The more you do that, the easier it gets to be to analyze where you're blowing it in the middle of things, because you're talking to the Holy Spirit.
I'd suggest there's something in our culture that strongly suggests, oh, you're not going to be a good witness if you're obnoxious, right? And where's the proof of that? Where's the proof that not being obnoxious and being polite and just the usual phrase is, show them, don't tell them. Okay, what has been the fruit of that? I don't see people come to Christ in droves because of our wonderful lifestyle. So we could stand to be a little bit more obnoxious and I'm saying this to me, if we're afraid of being obnoxious, then the follow-up question is why? Why don't you want to be obnoxious? And the true answer is, because I want them to think well of me. So I'm more concerned about what they think of me than what they think of Jesus. I'm nailing myself here, people. I'm not nailing you. I'm playing with things in my mind that I'm not comfortable with, but there it is.
Appreciate it, Steve. Ellen's telling me, shut it down. I had to apologize to a group of believers last week to tell them I'm at a point in life where I don't care. I don't care if people are offended by the news of the gospel, because it's the news of the gospel, salvation to all that believes. So I need to tell folks.